Hello guys, welcome to a new video here in JS Education. My name is Carlos Santana and this is the video number 34 for the course Developing a Headless CMS with TypeScript and GraphQL. So let's start. So the first thing we need to do is, as always, update our packages using ncu-u in our backend and frontend, and make sure you copy the versions you are seeing on my terminal to avoid any problem. And after, you need to install them with npm install. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is go into backend, source, models, index, and then I'm going to add from fogg-utils the method keys, which is the same as object.keys, but to avoid being like too large, I just consolidate that in a function in a fogg-utils. So here, instead of object.keys, basically we're just do now keys like that. After that, that's the only change on backend. Now we need to go to frontend, and then you have to go to app, dashboard, content, create or edit entry, index. And in here, we are going to change a lot of things. I hope I can explain everything correctly. But remember that if you have any question, feel free to join our Slack community. The link is on the description. So in here, we need to include the use effect from React, and then we need to include keys and has own property from fogg-utils. Then on line 33, we need to get entries. And then line 53, sorry, you need to initialize the initial selected entries as an object. Then here, after the validation of if field type is a dropdown, we need to add this block if the type is a reference and just when it's editing. So for creation, this is not going to apply, just for editing. So basically we get our initial entries, filtering the entries by the model name. Remember that on the last video, we implement the model name in our fields, and that's how we are getting that on the entries. And actually the field name is the same name as the model name, so we get it like that. The entry value ID is going to get it from field values position 0, that value. So right now, the thing is that we are doing a relationship one by one, or one-on-one on relationships or references. Later, we will move that to have also one-to-many and many-to-many, but that's going to add more complexity. So for now, it's going to be one-on-one. So that's why we are getting here right now just the position 0 with the value. So if we get initial entries, basically to get the selected entry, remember that the entries that we so on the last video, I show you that the entries that we are saving on or passing on GraphQL, we are using a JSON format. So because this is dynamically, right? So basically, in here, we have that JSON already, which is an array. And basically here we're saying like entries, and then we filter that is an array where the ID of the entry is equals to entry value ID, which is the one that we have on the field. And then we map that to add the entry plus the model name. So in this case, we are going to have the entry ID, the value, the field ID plus the model name in the selected entry object. And then basically on our initial selected entries of position of field name, we are going to save our selected entry like that. Now you need to go to line 120 and we are going to add some new states. Is reference modal open, reference entries, and selected entries, like that. This method is repeated. We need to add this new function called set, well, two functions, set current entry and handle reference model. This is basically to open the model, but also to set the reference entries once. Well, after I show you the model, you will understand more. Like, basically, the entries are going to be displayed as a blocks, and when you click on one, you are going to set the entries into your state. So this set current entry, basically we are like getting a new selected entries object to avoid manipulating this directly. And then basically the entry.model name is the same as the entry field name. Remember that the field name is exactly the same as the name of the model. Where I was, equals to array of entry, right? So then we are going to set selected entries, and we are passing that, and then we are going to close our model. Like, this method is executed when the model is open and we click on one entry, we set it and we close the model. This handle reference model is to open the initial model and setting the reference entries, passing the model entries. After this, you need to go here and we change, I mean, this line is too long, so right now we only need to do has on properties, remove the call. This is a function that I created on fogg-utils. It's exactly the same, but just to be more consistent in the code, I have a short code. So basically you just do that, like that. Also here, object.keys, we just need keys. And then here on the submit, we are going to say entry keys. Basically, we are going to get the keys for the selected entries. So basically, this object is going to say, for example, the name of the model, for example, author, and then an array of entries, right? And then maybe we have code, and then an array of entry of codes. But these keys is going to get this author and code, which is the entries keys that we need. And then basically we need to look the values to make sure they're not empty. So if we have entry keys, the length is higher than 0, then we loop each one with validating the selected entries key. That means if we have the value and if exists enough empty values here. If that exists, then we delete that node. Because basically this one, get empty values, is going to get the values from the values state, right? But we are not updating the entries on their values yet. We are getting selected entries, so that's why we need to validate in this way. So we are going to get always true in the reference, like if the reference is empty, and that's why we need to validate this and delete that position if it's already there. So now we need to add an extra validation if empty values exist and the keys of empty values length is higher than 0. Why is this? Because empty values can be false if this function returns false, but because it's going to return true on the references fields, and then here is going to be deleted, then it's going to end with an empty object. So if we just keep like this, empty object is a truthy value, so then it's going to access, right? It's going to pass that validation. So that's why we need to validate that it's not false and it has some elements on the object. Okay. Now we need to go to line 221 right here. And in here, we need to set our entry IDs to values. So we have the entry IDs, entry keys, sorry. And then for each one, we need to loop that and validate if the selected entry has that value. If it has that value, then we're going to get the key and change it to lowercase. Again, remember that this is going to be like author code with the name of the model name, so it's gonna be with uppercase. So this lowercase is going to be like author and code like this. Equals to selected entries of key, in this case selected entries that author or code or whatever of position 0 that ID. Again, this is just because we are doing one-on-one relationships, one-to-one relationships, but later this logic is going to change once we implement one-to-many or many-to-many. And then here we need to remove this object, just leave keys, and also 284. And we are going to reduce the time to 1 second when display the after create or edit entry model, because it takes so long to display it. And after this, before the title, we need to use we need to add the use effect. And in here is the first load, like we need to pass initial selected entries here. So if we have an initial entries, and selected entries is 0, that means we don't have select anything, then we set our selected entries, right? So this is for the initial one, because remember that the entries are being pulled from, basically we are getting the entries for all the models, and we are like setting here. So we don't want, we just want this to happen once. Otherwise, this is going to loop, like it's going to get like infinitive renders here if we don't validate that. So we don't want that. And then finally, we need to add a bunch of new props on custom fields. Entries, reference entries, selected entries, set current entry, handle reference model, is reference model. Okay, so now let's go to custom fields and custom fields CSS. And I add some styles here. 68 right here. Entries, reference. Later, you need to go to custom fields index. And we are going to import from fogg-ui a new component called entry block. Then you need to import, reference model, that we will create that later. And we need to add a bunch of new props, entries, reference entries, selected entries, set current entry handle reference model and is reference model. And also we need to pass that as a props here. Okay. Okay, let me put some comment here to differentiate the methods. Okay, so we need to add a new method here after the handle selected file right here, and it's gonna be render reference, which is going to be passed a field, and then we are going to get the model ID from field.default value, the model entries. Basically we are going to find the specific entry by the model ID. I mean the entries by the model ID. And then if we have the model ID and we have entries, we get the model name, and then the current entries are getting from the selected entries that we pass from the parent component, and we just select the selected entries on that model name. Then here we are going to render our entries. If we have current entries, we are going to map it. The title of each entry is gonna be from object.entries. We pass the entries and then position 0, position 1. So that means it's going to take the first field that we have it, and then that's going to be used as a title. And then we return, or we render our entry block, which is going to have a key, a model name, a title, and a status. And this is going to render a block. Okay. After that, you need to go to the return, and we are going to grab all this code into a fragment. Like that. And we need to render our reference model like this. And basically we are passing on the data, the reference entries and the set current entries. So in this way we can render the blocks inside the model. Okay. And then finally we need to add, after the file, we need to render, if the type is reference, we execute render reference and we pass that field. Okay, now we go to models, create field model, and then on line 31, we are going to pass models here. And then on line 37, we are going to get the model name from options.data.model name. In here, we will have a new state to set a reference. So this is for create the field of type reference, right? So we go to line 106, and we need to validate here, just like we did with the dropdown. We're going to validate if our type of field is a reference, then we save the default value, the reference, which is gonna have the ID of that model that we are referencing. That's why in the last file, we are getting the model ID from the default value. Okay, and then we go to render dropdown 155 right here, and I just standardizing. I change the name of enum options for select options, and then enum for option, just like that. here select enumeration, and this is going to come from select options. Yep. Okay. So now we need to create a new method after render dropdown that is gonna be render reference. So basically our current model, we get it from options data model identifier, and then we select, we get the options from the models, we filter, basically we are going to avoid using our asset model and the same model we are editing. So for example, if you are on post model, you cannot select post as a reference because you are basically on the same model, right? So that means you need to point, or you need to reference to a different model that is not asset and is not the same model. After that, basically we are going to map that with options, option.model name and option.id to render or select. And this is a reference, this is the select that we will have, and if we get a value, we use set reference to put that value. Okay, and on line 260 here, basically if the type of that field is reference, we render reference. Now let's go to the models SCSS, and we need to add this block on line 24. It's gonna be this one, entry block, and then it's going to have these styles. Now you need to create a new model called reference model.tsx. Okay, and that one is going to be short. So basically here we get the entry block from fogg-ui, and this is the same model we have created before. Basically here we get the reference entries and the set current entry, which is the method to set once the user select one. If we don't have reference entries, basically we just don't render anything. We should have it. And then this model is going to do the same as we did on the create or edit part to render each block. The difference is that this one is going to have an onClick method, which is going to set the current entry and is going to pass that entry if we click in that block. So that's the model we need to create for the reference. Later, you need to go to schema declarations index. And basically now we are going to pass as a prop. Give me 1 second. We need to pass as a prop models. Also here. And we are going to pass, after enumerations, we need to pass the model name and the models. Also, we are going to add a new validation here on the head to see if the field type is equals to dropdown or reference. It should have 790 pixels, otherwise just 700. And in here, I'm adding some comments. Also here. So we are only displaying reference declaration if we have at least 2 custom models. So that means we need to have, for example, post, and then at least 1 more model. If we just have 1 model, custom model, we are not going to show the reference declaration, because if you only have 1 model, then you don't have another one to reference or to link. So that's why we need to validate that the length -1 because we are removing the system model assets. So if the model length -1, which is removing the assets, is less or equals than 1, then basically we just avoid to render that declaration. Now let's go to fields SCSS, and we're just going to pass a class here after the dropdown for the reference, which is going to have the electric violet, and then fields index. And here we're going to render our reference. Now we need to go to schema index, and we need to get use context from React. We need to get the app context, and then we are going to get the state and get app by ID using the context. So remember that the get app by ID is executed all the time. So basically here, if we don't have get app by ID, we just return a div empty. And that's why, because we need to pass the models to our declarations like that. And now let's go to GraphQL, create fields, create field. And now you need to pass the model name and also the model name here and the model name right here. Okay, now we are going to create on values a new query that we created on the last video called get entries by model ID .query.ts, and it's going to be this one. It's going to pass the model ID and it's going to return an entries, which is a JSON. I showed you that last video, on the last video. Now let's go to pages, dashboard, app, model name, model. And then here we import this query. After that, we declare model ID as null and entries an empty array. I change or I standardize some names. For example, this data value is going to be now get values by entry data. It's the same way we're doing here, get declarations query data. And then actually it has to be get values by entry query data. And then this one, data enumerations, also needs to be get enumerations by app ID query data. Okay. And I need to change this one. We need to change this one. And also we are going to add a new query, but if we get the model first, actually get model query data, okay. If we get the model query, we just get the model ID from this get model query data .get model.id, and then we execute get entries by model ID, which should be model ID query. Okay. And then get entries by model ID query. Okay. And get values. Okay. And then we need to add a validation right here saying if get entries by model ID query data, if we have that, then we parse. Do you remember that we are saving the entries as a JSON.stringify, right? So in here, we are reversing that and we are parsing the JSON. So now we can pass the entries to the component and the new names like that. Perfect. And the last thing we need to do is going to share styles bars, and we are going to add a new color called electric violet, and we are going to remove a duplicated color, Picton blue. If we search it, we found it 2 times. So I'm going to remove the second one. And that's it. So let's test our application. So I'm going to start fresh. I need to remove everything from the backend, otherwise you won't get it like how this thing work. So let's change that to true. And let's start our server. Okay, let me change that to false. Okay. Okay, so now if I go here, I'm going to go log out, then carlos.santana at dev.education 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, create a new one, and then say block. Okay, we need to create a new model. Just click post. If you see right now, I don't see the declaration for the reference because I just have one model. So I can add here title, slug, and then content. And then let's suppose I want to create a new model for authors, right? So I say author is my new model. And then this is going to have just author name, just like that. So probably I can add some content here. So the author name is gonna be Carlos Santana. And then create a new one. I don't know, John Wick. I'm not sure if it's with H or not, but whatever. John Wick. And then I go here. I see the authors there. Now I go to the post model again. Now I'm seeing the reference because I have more than one model. Now I click here on reference. I'm going to say author. The reference is giving me here the drop down, and I just have one model here, which is filtering the asset model and the post model because it's the same. So I just I just can use the author. I create the relationship here. Now, if I go to create content for post, I can say, okay, my first post, some HTML, whatever. And then here on the author, I click here, and those are the entries for the author, the author model. So I have Carlos Santana and John Wick. So if I select Carlos Santana, basically I'm going to link this entry, Carlos Santana, to this entry of my post. And here I'm seeing the status of that entry because it can be draft. So for example, if I publish this one, I go to entries and I can edit this part. And with the edition, I'm still retrieving the entry that I link to my author model. If I click here and I change it, it's going to change. So right now it's just allowing one reference. Later, we are going to be able to select multiple if we want, right? But for now, it's going to be just like that. Also, if you go to author, and then probably you edit John Wick, and you save it, and now it's a draft. If you go to post, you see that, it's like automatically linked to this one. It's affecting the status, and if I change the author name, it's going to be reflected here. So basically, we are just linking or referencing one model with other with a one-on-one relationship or one-to-one relationship. So in the next video, I'm going to try to implement the one-to-many relationship. And probably in the next videos, we're going to work on the many-to-many because that adds a lot of complexity. And if this looks hard, the other is gonna be a little bit harder. But at least you know now how it's going to work more or less. So that's it for this video. I don't want to make it any longer. I think it was long enough. So that's it. Thank you for your time. Remember that if you have any question, feel free to join our Slack community. The link is on the description. And if you really like those videos, please help me sharing those videos with your friends and subscribe to this new channel. So thank you so much and see you in the next video. Bye.